Welcome, everyone, and happy Ombuds Day 2023. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the Assistant University Ombudsperson at Michigan State University, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. I'm very excited to introduce our webinar to engage with our esteemed guest, Dr. Thomas Zgambo. Before we begin our conversation, however, I want to thank everybody who contributed to today's event and to this year's Ombuds Day. This is truly a collaborative effort, which is one of its great strengths. This is my second year working with the Ombuds Day Subcommittee, which I've taken. What I've taken away over the course of these past 2 years is that even with the immense diversity in the role, function, location, we as ombuds, ombudsmen, ombudsperson have more in common than not. To that point, I want to highlight this year's theme, diverse in role and united in service. We represent diversity in role, background, location, identity, training, and language. In some ways, I cannot think of many fields that encompass the breadth that the Ombuds field does. However, we all work with people who are facing challenges or difficult situations. This might include citizens who have been impacted by maladministration, employees in a workplace who have been treated unfairly, students mistreated by instructors. This can also include our loved ones living in long-term care facilities or impact the lives of children or the incarcerated. Ombuds are also called to assist folks experiencing interpersonal conflict and even violations of human rights. Ombuds can be found in a wide range of sectors and engage with a wide range of constituencies. But ultimately, we're here in service to others. The benefits of an ombuds to society, to government, governmental agencies, organizations, corporations, and educational institutions, among others, have been documented, including by our esteemed guests today. Ombuds across sectors work to ensure that individuals do not get lost in the bureaucracy and to ensure that voices are heard, even those voices that may not be as loud as others. And I'm excited to engage on this further with our guests today. Before we continue, I'd also like to remember an ombuds we lost this year. Jared Lee, an ombuds at UC Irvine, passed away this year, and I'd like to offer a moment of silence. Thank you. As I shared, this is a very collaborative process and event, and I'd like to thank a few folks, especially the Ombuds Day subcommittee members, who include Dr. Belinda Robinson, the Associate Organizational Ombudsman with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and our representative from the Coalition of Federal Ombudsmen, Ellen Miller, the Executive Director at the International Ombuds Association, Joel Shorts, the Texas Health and Human Services Ombudsman and our United States Ombudsman Association representative, William Whitehead, the Oklahoma State Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and Tony Fulbright, the Deputy Long-Term Care Ombudsman, who serve as our National Association for State and Long-Term Care Ombudsman. Sarah Agarami, the Section of Dispute Resolution Fellow, who led the marketing efforts for our subcommittee this year, and Hershenia Brown, who's representing the Emerging Ombuds Network, who will be co-facilitating this session with me. I'd also like to thank Marcus Stergio, a committee fellow who led the efforts to request proclamations. As of last I checked earlier today, we have proclamations from 36 states. These can be found on the ombudsday.com website. Marcus also worked with Shannon Burton to edit the September edition of the Just Resolutions newsletter, which was dedicated to Ombuds Day, highlighting the work of ombuds. I'd also like to thank Julie Boncompagnie from the Université Polytechnique Montréal and president of the Association des Ombudsmen et Enseignements Supérieurs de Québec for her ongoing collaboration. I hope you had an opportunity to view the fantastic webinar that WESC put on this morning. And if not, I believe a recording will be made. I'd also like to thank Donna Douglas-Williams, the Ombuds Director at Pinterest, who served as the guest for the wonderful Ombuds Day themed episode of the ABA section of Dispute Resolutions podcast. I would highly, highly encourage you to take a listen if you haven't yet. A link to that can be found at ombudsday.com or wherever you find your podcasts. Ken Skadacek and Meg Willoughby, the co-chairs of the ABA section of Dispute Resolution Ombuds Committee, for their work and dedication to Ombuds Day over the last few years. I also want to thank the staff of the ABA section of Dispute Resolution, Jennifer Mickle, Jessica Roski, Melissa Buckley, and Maria Bartolo, as well as the leadership of the Section for Dispute Resolution and the American Bar Association for their ongoing support of Ombuds Day. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce and thank my co-facilitators. Sarah Agamiri is the Human Rights and Equity Advisor at the Halton Catholic School District Board in Burlington, Ontario, Canada. She's currently serving as one of the Ombuds Committee Fellows through the ABA section of Dispute Resolution, and as I shared, has served as our marketing liaison for this year's Ombuds Day subcommittee. She'll help moderate the chat. If you have questions for Dr. Zgambo as we move through our conversation, please feel free to submit them, and Sarah will help to moderate these towards the end of the conversation. At this point, I would like to hand it off to my other co-facilitator, Hershenia Brown.
Thank you, Ryan, and good morning and good afternoon to you wherever you are. Thank you for everyone that's attending today. My name is Hershenia Brown, and I am the Associate Ombuds for the University of Kansas. I want to take this opportunity to say that it's a pleasure to co-facilitate Ombuds Day 2023, and I would like to, at this time, present the warm introduction of our distinguished guest speaker from our esteemed colleague, Mary Rowe. We encourage you to adjust your volume because it may be a little low, and we'd like to present that video right now. I think we're having a little bit trouble hearing the volume.
Jen, I think you may just need to stop share and reshare and make sure the share audio button is clicked.
Hold on just a moment. Sorry, folks. My apologies. Let's start again.
Hi, I'm Mary Rowe. I'm a long-term ombud. I was a long-term ombuds at MIT. I'm now a researcher and consultant. Happy Ombuds Day to all of you. I have the very high honor of introducing Dr. Thomas Zgambo. Now, of course, it's true for every person on earth that there isn't anyone else like them. But in Thomas's case, he really is in a class by himself. Reasonable people might conclude that he's the most distinguished organizational ombuds the world has seen in the 50-odd years of our profession. Thomas is a man of deep faith and hope. He's the beloved husband of Anita, whose many achievements, including her own PhD, he has supported. He's the beloved father of 4 and grandfather to several more, and a beloved patriarch to an extended family on several continents. He speaks several languages fluently, and he can be at least polite in several more. He also speaks the languages of chemistry from his doctoral work and work at Gillette. He speaks the languages of climate protection and agriculture in Malawi. In our world of ombudsing, Thomas is a profound expert on race relations, gender equity, dealing equitably with disabilities, hierarchy relationships, the importance of faiths and of cross-cultural communications, and of personality dynamics, and of necessity, the languages of bureaucracy and of dozens of affinity groups, and of the whole cyber world and artificial intelligence. We celebrate him here for his leadership in the world of conflict management, not least his having been a major leader and president of TOA before even there was an IOA. Thomas has been an Ombuds for nearly 3 decades, having co-founded the offices at Polaroid and Coca-Cola Enterprises, and having blossomed out the Ombuds offices at MIT and the World Bank and IMF. I estimate that he has supported and enriched the lives of at least 10,000 visitors and responders, and of hundreds of Ombuds colleagues like me. Visitor evaluations of Thomas hover at the very top. Colleague evaluations are full of deep respect and deep affection. Thomas Zgambo was an early writer about organizational ombuds cost effectiveness and a pioneer in using corporate data in that endeavor. His annual reports are a model of appreciative inquiry. He does not simply catalog the issues he's seen, he affirms each good step forward in the organization, building and offering many details on the strengths in the organization for working on problems, rather than simply naming problems with brief recommendations. Although, please let me add, he is able to nail organizational shortcomings with succinct clarity. I owe him a lot. In 1991, he personally launched me onto the website I now inhabit as if it were my new home. He was a wry and brilliant tutor for me and many others in the years that we all made videos for each other. If ever I might have been thinking about giving up, Thomas was a model of hope, faith, courage, humor, and commitment. He has an uncanny gift to discern the real interests and core values of the people he meets, a gift that illuminates the concept of deep understanding. After all these thoughts, am I going overboard? Are you wondering now if I've ever had reason to wonder about his good judgment? Well, maybe yes. That, for example, you might want to ask him what on earth he was thinking when he decided to try skydiving. But back to this introduction of a very dear colleague. When I hear words like integrity, generosity of spirit, brilliant systems thinking, wry humor and tenacious problem solving, a man of faith and grace, I think of Thomas Zgambo.
Many thanks to Mary Rowe for that wonderful introduction. Thomas, it is an honor to speak with you today, and many attendees are joining us today and looking forward to hearing about your journey. So let's start with the first question for you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your childhood, your upbringing. What was your childhood like?
Heshenia, so let me first of all thank you for having me here today, and also thank Mary for those kind words. So I was born in a little town called Lilongwe, Malawi, now the capital of the country. I was fourth of 10 children. There were 3 boys and 7 girls. My parents, my mother was trained as a midwife, but chose to be a businesswoman and a farmer. My father, I was looking back now, it follows like my career. He started out as a teacher, then he was a policeman, then an accountant, and he retired as a hospital administrator. So as you learn about me, you also found that my career path sort of took a tortuous path, if you will. The rest of my siblings pursued different activities and careers. But let me say this, and Mary knows this about me, I come from a tradition of strong women. So my mother, my aunts, my sisters, and all the women around me are strong women. And the men in my family can't hold a candle to them. So I just want to mention that. So I came to the US actually to study theology, but ended up studying chemistry. And so I had my first degree in chemistry at Carson Newman College in Tennessee, and a master's and PhD at University of North Texas. And along the way, I picked up an MBA in technology management. But let me also mention, because this hasn't been mentioned a lot, I studied at the African Methodist Episcopal Church's Ministerial Institute, where I was ordained as an elder and pastored a church in Texas and one in Massachusetts. And I know the question was about my childhood. I don't remember. My sisters and others told me that I was a very naughty child, a difficult youngster, but I don't recall being difficult at all.
So you were 4 of 10.
Yes.
Do you think that introduced the ability to sort of mediate disputes or to identify issues among groups of siblings or groups of people?
I don't know about mediating, but at least negotiating my way around the rest of them. And maybe that skill may have started there as a way to manage within a large family. And when I said the 4th of 10, that's just my, my siblings. But in our house, we had an extended family. So we had more than 10 in the house. And every time, even when I go back now to Malawi, in the house, everyone is a brother, everyone is a sister. Here would be cousin, second cousin, third cousin, and all of that. But we just call each other brother and sister. So yes, the large family sort of teaches you to negotiate, to help settle dispute among the family members. Yes.
Thank you. I was going to ask you about your academic preparation. So you hold a PhD in analytical chemistry.
Yes.
And you began your career as a chemist with the Gillette Corporation.
Yes.
What drew you to that line of work, and how did you enjoy that?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I came to study theology, but en route to studying theology, I decided to look at medicine. And in the process of preparing for medical school, I took, of course, a lot of science classes, biology, chemistry, biochemistry, and in the end, decided to pursue chemistry. And, was able to get a PhD in there. But while I was pursuing chemistry, I got married to my lovely wife, Anita, whom I met while I was in graduate school. And we had 2 children, and I had to, find a way of supporting the family, apart from being a teaching assistant or research assistant. So I jumped to get a job at Gillette Corporation.
That's wonderful. That initial wanting to pursue theology certainly plays a strong role in being an ombuds. We have ombuds that come from different backgrounds and different spaces. So I can see how that definitely contributed to the role. So if you can tell us, what are some commonalities that you see between that career in chemistry and your career as an ombud?
Yeah, so I've been asked that question quite a number of times. And when I look back, really, I see indeed some similarities or commonalities in the work that we do as ombuds. Being a chemist or an analytical chemist, you're looking for a solution to problems. And so you have to be patient in searching for those solutions, or at least in trying to understand the problem. And when you come up with an idea for a product, just like you come up with an idea for options, you have to think, can this product be manufactured at a reasonable cost? And after this product is manufactured, is it sustainable? How long can it function? Similarly, when we are looking at options, we look at viable options when we're providing to our visitors to see if the option itself is manageable, is cost effective, and it's actually doable. So, the similarities I see here is in evaluating not just the creation of a new product or idea, but rather looking at how sustainable that is, and it's going to be long lasting. So options when we're developing them for our visitors, we try to make sure that we're putting forth or developing options that can be implemented and that can be long lasting. So I see relationships there of similarities, not just as a chemist, even in the ministerial realm. You talked about theology, being able to listen, because unless you listen, you may not be able to understand what the issue is. And most of us, I'm sure, have a lot of examples in our experiences where a visitor has come and we think we are close to options, only to find out that we have to go back, try to understand what the problem is in the first place. So the time it takes to understand the problem, to understand what other factors may be influencing the problem, so that the solution is not just the one interest, but something that may prevent that problem from occurring again going forward, at the same time preserving the relationships of the parties involved in the conflict. So I see similarities there, the need to analyze, the need to understand, and the need to think about how will this solution or this product perform going forward.
That's fantastic. I can see that. I can see, as you're walking through that, I can see the through lines there. And so that kind of brings us to the next question, though, and in terms of how did you transition? So my understanding, your first ombuds job was with the Polaroid Corporation. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found the work, how you got started, and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, so that's very interesting, because people think that there was a method to how I got to being an ombudsperson. Actually, I joined Polaroid Corporation as a process engineer, working on developing manufacturing processes, scaling up from the lab to manufacturing. Initially at Polaroid, I was working on instant photography. Most of you may be too young to remember the Polaroid instant camera, but that's what I was working on. And later on, I was working on environmentally friendly digital imaging for medical purposes. And it was at that time that the project was stopped. And I didn't have a stable job. And a position came up of an ombudsman. Polaroid is a very progressive company. It had, before, ahead of most organizations, it had a quasi-union called an employee committee. So every time the management were making decisions that impacted employees, they'd use this committee as a sounding board. Okay, and also the committee was playing the role of advocacy for grievances for employees. And in 1994, the National Labor Relations Board got wind of this committee and determined that it was an illegal labor union. And they put a cease and desist order. And at that point, Polaroid had a difficult time figuring out how they're going to continue their collaborative efforts with employees, because the employee committee provided informal mechanisms for resolving issues. So they conducted research and came upon the function of ombudsman. And then, of course, Mero was just next door at MIT. They talked to Mero, and Mero helped us develop the function. They posted 5 positions. I applied for one of them, and I got it. And I'm looking back, because when I got the job, of the 5 of us, I was about 41 years old. The next person was 57, and the oldest person was 64. And they had a lot of experience in the company and with people. And so I was shaking my boots every time a visitor came through the door. But that's how actually I was fortunate enough to get the position in 1994 at Polaroid Corporation. And Mero helped us establish that office there. And it is actually, I think, one of the best career, actually the best career decision I ever made here. I'll be retiring in a few months. Happy to have been an ombudsperson, and I've met wonderful people in this profession.
Wow, you've had a very intriguing career. I want to pause for a moment to say, I don't know if we shared this earlier. We're going to leave time for questions and answers at the end of the segment. So if everyone, if you have a question, if you can please feel free to jot down your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom, and we will try to make sure we address everyone's questions at the very end. We're going to leave maybe about 20-25 minutes for Q&A. So just to continue, I'm glad that you shared that. So that helps me kind of put things into perspective with where you started and where you're ending. So tell us, what was that motivation for you continuing with the ombuds profession?
So, well, let me say that at least the first year, I was questioning myself, what did I get myself into? After meeting with visitors and not able to sleep, thinking about the problem, taking the problem home with me, and wondering if I, helped the people think through their issues. Is it going to be resolved? But after a while, I realized that actually I'm there to help. It was not my problem, it was their problem. And my role is to work with them to get there. So in terms of motivation, first, I should say, the first motivator was the fact that the company, ProRed Corporation, was very serious about the role. We reported to the chairman and CEO of the company. We met periodically with the chairman. They provided all the resources we needed to get the job done, even for training. They introduced other things like peer mediation in the organization, indicating that they were serious about resolving issues in the company. So as these things were unfolding, it was obvious to me that this was a serious program that the company wanted to have, and that it wasn't some stopgap measure. The second motivator, was indeed Mary Raw, I should say that, because she was always there for guidance, for advice, for encouragement. She's the one who got me involved in the Ombudsman Association, TOA. She was the one who also got me involved in training. And I've been, I started training in Ombuds 101 way back when. Mary encouraged me to do that, and allowed me to also, to name drop a little bit. There were people, in addition to Mary Raw, people like Wilbur Hicks, Howard Gatlin, Linda Wilcox, Ella Wheaton, this name might ring a bell, Carol Trocchio, Sharon Levine, Chuck Howard, Broderick Hill, Elizabeth Pino, Wendell Jones, and others that were very encouraging and very supportive. And you'll find, if you haven't found that already, that ombuds generally are very generous. And they were very generous to me. I would have a case, I would call late, they would make time to listen to me, to help me walk through hypothetically the issue. And any resources I need, I reach out to them. The third motivator, really, and which continues to motivate me today, is when you see the faces of your visitors after you've met with them. And even when you have not found a solution for the problem that they were struggling with, but somehow they've gained a new perspective looking at the problem, and they're walking out, grateful and smiling. It used to be, as a chemist, of course, I had to produce, a product, something substantive, and doing this work in the initial years, it was like, wow, it's difficult. I can't measure my progress in here. But when I realized what was happening after meeting these people, and they're thanking you, and you look at, what have I done? I said, but you were there, you listened to me. You helped me redefine the issue so that I can look at it in a different way. That's what keeps me going. People ask me when they come, so how many cases have you resolved? And of course, it's kind of hard to answer that question. I said, well, people tell me, that they've been helped by coming to the office. When they provide exit surveys, they're very happy that they came, even when they didn't get what it was that they came for, they walked out with something that they can use. So that continues to be the motivation for me going forward.
Thank you for that. I'm curious. I want to ask, about the next sort of steps in your career. Transitioning. You worked for Polaroid. You worked for Coca-Cola, and then you transitioned into working with international organizations.
Yes.
How did you transition? What did you kind of identify as differences there?
Yes. Yeah. So let me first give credit where credit is due. I was with Polaroid as an ombudsperson for 3.5 years. I'd been with the company 11 years. The other years as an engineer. I was very close, during that time as an ombudsperson with Mayor Rowe. So I left Polaroid. I went to MIT. I was there for 3 years. All right, and I learned a lot there from my colleagues, Mayor Rowe and Tony Robinson and others. And I met a lot of fine ombuds in the Boston area that were very helpful. And it was Mary who encouraged me to apply for a job at Coca-Cola. I was enjoying working with her, and I thought she was enjoying working with me too. But when the job opened up, she encouraged me to apply. Looking back, of course, she was looking out for my interest as well. So I went to Coca-Cola to establish a new program there, and I was there for 6.5 years. And when a position opened up at the World Bank, Mayor Rowe also encouraged me to apply for that position, and I applied. I'm glad I applied. I'm not blaming Mary for pushing me or encouraging me. But we all need someone to push us to the next level. So coming to an international, and Ryan, I'm going to reword that to intergovernmental organization, because these are international organizations, they're member organizations, and different countries are members. The World Bank, has a membership. Pretty much all the countries in the world, except maybe 3 or 4, are not members. Are members. The same thing with the IMF. So they have a governmental component to them. And you ask, the transition, what was different. Working in corporate America, or even in the universities, as an organizational ombudsperson, you have the benefit, I call it the benefit, of the US laws. And the fact that the US is very litigious makes the ombuds role very important in the organization to help resolve issues without having to go outside. Okay. So when I went to the World Bank, and the World Bank and the IMF, they enjoy legal immunities and privileges, meaning that they don't follow the laws of the host countries. They don't follow labor laws in the US or ADA laws or privacy laws. They act as their own little country, and so they have their own internal justice system. As a result, the employees cannot sue the organization in the local courts. They cannot sue their managers, whether it's for harassment or any kind of that, any kind of misbehavior. So as a result, they have to have an internal system. The ombudsperson, whether it's mediation, whether it's a grievance committee, whether it's a tribunal. But because most of these employees are on G4 visas, in other words, they are on work visas, if they lose their job, they're going to have to leave the country in a month or 2. So they don't come forward as easily as people would at a university in the US or at a corporation in the US. Because in the US, you'd have leverage going to the courts. There, it's all internal justice system. So the ombuds role is very, very critical. And how can I put it? It's actually written in policy, and it's a permanent role. You don't have to worry about budgets, because there's an expectation that each organization will have a complete battery of resources for people to bring grievances. So I mentioned the legal jurisdiction that these organizations enjoy, job security that employees are afraid and they don't come forward. And then the other component is golden handcuffs. Most of people working in these organizations are expatriates. As a result, they receive expatriate benefits. Some of those benefits are very nice, like tuition, university tuition for their children and all of that. So losing a job is losing a lot. And some of them, the children are born here. And so they wouldn't be able to go home and adjust easily. The other thing is the diversity, because, for example, where I am now, we have employees from 140 countries. Diversity, nationality, ethnicity, religion, languages, worldviews, values. So it's very important that one be a good listener and a good learner to be able to be seen as impartial, independent, neutral. Confidentiality, of course, is very critical as well. And because of this diversity, there's a need for strict rules. So there is, they're very bureaucratic. So as an ombuds, your role is really to be able to break through the bureaucratic red tape to get things done. And, your leverage really is the skills that you have as an ombudsperson, and your ability to understand the culture of the organization. So while I'm listing the differences between these international organizations and corporate USA or academia, the one common thread that ties all these sectors is humanity. You are dealing with people. You are dealing with people, and you can reach them. You can connect with them when you are working at that level. I hope I've answered that question, Ryan.
Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned the differences between all three sectors. Can you share a bit more about the unique challenges that you encounter between all three, between corporate, academia, government?
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. So the challenges, between corporate, academia, and government, that I've experienced in corporate, when you are dealing with visitors and when you're providing feedback to senior management, there's a tendency to act prematurely because there's a concern that the reputation of the organization and indeed, the stock, the price of stock may drop or that it'll be in the papers. So they tend to act fast and sometimes prematurely to resolve the issue. So your understanding of that culture is very helpful in making sure that you're being fair to both sides. When a visitor comes and you're dealing with a respondent, that you've heard both sides. So when you're providing feedback, it should be very balanced. In academia, on the other hand, it takes a long time to make decisions. There's, people like to discuss it, and sometimes especially when you're doing, you're providing information that could impact systems change. That takes a long time. It could take a year to make a change, while in corporate America, it would take just 1 week. So you have to be patient with that. You have to understand that as well, that it takes a while. And also in academia, you may need multiple, I'm going to use the word alliances or multiple stakeholders that you need to work with to help move a change that would impact the whole organization. While in corporate America, 1 or 2 executives can make a decision and it goes. In government, the difference there is, at least in the organizations that I've worked in, because of these strict rules, managers are afraid to make decisions. They would like to have more than one person involved in making decisions. A good example would be, let's say, a case of harassment, or bullying or anything of that nature. Very few managerial decisions are made. They would require an investigation, and the investigation has to have a finding, and based on that finding, make a decision. Even if they can see that the turnover is high, number of people going to the hospitals for mental health or stress is high, decisions wait until an investigation is completed. In corporate America, they'll decide just like that. If they have to pay off the person to leave the organization, they'll do that. in government, in intergovernmental organizations, it takes a long time to come to a decision. So that's an example I would share. And even in systemic change, in the government organization, of course, you may want, there may be a working group that may look at the issue, but most of the time they like a blue ribbon panel to come with some political connections to be able to make a recommendation that will stay. And that's not the case, of course, in universities or in corporate America. I hope that example, showed the differences in these three sectors.
It does. And just as a quick follow-up question, which one sat better with you internally? Which one did you feel more connected with?
So I get that question a lot. And I'm going to say that in all of them, I felt connected. Why? Because my focus has been with the visitors, and by visitors, I'm also referring to the respondent managers. Because after you've worked a while in an organization and people see value, the managers start coming to you for guidance, to bounce off ideas. And so when you see that they're struggling with something and they're coming to you and they're able to come up with a way of going forward, it's very fulfilling. So it's those interactions that I miss. So even when I've had a team of ombuds and I'm managing ombuds, I've also continued to take cases, because that's how you stay connected to the organization. But let me say this, in terms of, relaxing a little, in the intergovernmental organizations, these positions are permanent. You don't have to worry about justifying the budget because there's a need to have an internal justice system. I've been in corporate America where programs have started and they have stopped. The same thing in academia, they may pause without a person, without an ombudsperson. But in this intergovernmental, they're written into their laws that you have an ombudsman. So it gives you time to plan properly, to collect good data, for demonstrating the value of the function. And also to hang in there when you're making, suggestions or, providing feedback that may be, that may help in changing policies and procedures. So you truly feel like you're an agent of change because you're not worried about, will they cut out resources? Will they stop this program? The only difference is that in these organizations, the term is fixed. So you're not there indefinitely. For example, at the World Bank, I had 2 5-year terms. At the IMF, it's 7-year term. While when I was at Coca-Cola, I would have stayed there until I retired. If I stayed at MIT, the same thing. But really, it's the work that it motivates you. And because I work with wonderful people at Polaroid, MIT, Coca-Cola, and even at World Bank, it made the work very fulfilling. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Maybe we'll shift a little bit in terms of your views on the profession and the evolution of the profession a little bit.
Yes.
You've been an ombuds for, my notes say 26 years. Is that true?
You can add maybe 3 more to that. But
okay.
Yeah.
20 something years.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know your reflections on how the profession has evolved in that time.
Yeah. So this is the question I think that we are all asking. Because when we started out way back, at least in the 70s and 80s, at least in corporate America, in universities, it was in the 60s. It was difficult for us to call it a profession because they were, isolated places where they were ombuds. But now, a lot more organizations, pretty much most of the universities, and both, I'm talking about both the organizational, classical, executive ombuds. You see ombuds in different locations. So the changes that have taken place have been a combination. I think employment law has changed significantly. The workplace demographics have changed significantly. The role of human resources has really evolved, and that has made a big difference in the need and the role of the ombuds, or the ombuds role. In the early years, ombuds people were hired from within. There were people who had been in the organization a long time, who understood the organization, who were respected, who were, as someone said, wise heads. In other words, you could go to them for guidance on anything. And it was toward the end of their career. They would be trusted to be objective because they didn't have any, they didn't have, a dog in the fight, if you want to put it that way. They were truly neutral because they didn't have to demonstrate anything. But now the embracing of, ADR, dispute resolution, the availability of all these educational institutions that are training conflict resolution experts. So you have people who have training in conflict analysis, the system design, so the approach has sort of changed in dealing with conflict per se. It's maybe a little more structured. They are theoretical models of dealing with conflict, while those of us who started way back, it was just a gut feel approach. Yes, we learn as we go and we develop models as we go, but when we start out, it's basically, the gut feel and humanity. So the profession has changed in that we have people now who are doing research in this work, and there is data that they can use to train others going forward. So training was a little more difficult then. I think it's a little easier now because there are publications, there's research that has been done. So the main change I see is in the kinds of skills. When I became an ombuds person, I had to learn to be a facilitator, to be a mediator, and all of that. The people coming in now have learned those before they even get into the job. So they are bringing in, refined skills already. The only skill they need to develop is the gut feel. When they are in the organization, being able to identify points of power, people then to connect with to help in resolving issues in the organization, and an understanding of the business mission of the organization so that they can be relevant and not be seen as just theoretical practitioners. So that's my short observation there. And of course, the advent of technology, we are still talking about this, do you set up an appointment by email, or do you do it by phone, or do you text? All of that has changed. So we need to relook at how we actually practice. And I think we'll get there.
Thank you for that marvelous response, because that was going to lead into the next question. You mentioned about the evolution over
Yes.
time of the actual profession.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about the skill set that you've seen evolve? You did mention some of it in your last response, but you can go into a little bit more detail, because I don't know about Ryan, but I know other ombuds and other networks that have always gotten a question of what skill set is specific to this role, or what do I need to have besides those ADR skills? What do you suggest, and what have you seen evolve over your career?
So what I have seen evolve is, in the early days, the ability to negotiate, to persuade, let's say there's a need for systemic change, your ability to meet with executives of the leadership, to communicate the needed change, right? Today, the people coming in are more analytical. Not only that, they're coming in, for example, with facilitation skills and training skills, so they can stem the tide by providing training. Now, I'm not encouraging that every ombudsperson should be training or facilitating, but should be aware of these kinds of skills and resources, whether they bring in someone to do it or they do it themselves. So, it's timely, because in the old days, human resources was also responsible for training and development. and they had in-house training and development groups, units. These days, that's not the case. Everything is outsourced. So it makes sense that if the ombudsperson has these skills and they can interact or based on their casework, they're identifying gaps and areas that need to be strengthened either by training or facilitating or team building, that they understand what needs. So when they're having a conversation with human resources or whoever it is that's responsible for addressing that need, they're able to communicate and answer the appropriate questions. So, I think those skills are very, very, very helpful today, and also around communication. And I'm going to sort of let me say, for example, during George Floyd's situation, okay, I found that most organizations, if the ombudsman was Black, they figured they would know how to do diversity. Okay, TIE. Okay. But likely for us, our new young colleagues have already studied that. So you don't have to be Black, you just have to be a complete ombuds to be able to understand these things. They get training in cultural surveys, they get training in inclusion. So they are bringing these up-to-date skills. And the idea is, how do you break through the organizational culture so that the paradigm shifts and people are more open to looking at things differently to be able to address the issues that they're experiencing in the organization.
Thank you. Yeah, I thank you for that answer. That's yeah, that's really important. And kind of to build on that, I'm curious to know, where do you see the profession moving towards? Like, where do you see the profession going in the next 5 to 10 years?
So that's a question I guess we'll do as a crystal ball, but let me say this. Without looking at a crystal ball, I am actually very happy with where the profession is now. I think there are more organizations that have accepted it. And also, they are not just organizations, but ombuds who have been willing, and if I may quote Ella Whitten, we ombuds where we are at. We have ombud standards, standards of practice and all of that, but even the standards of practice have to be adopted where you are working. In other words, we shouldn't force, the one model in each organization. We have to find out why they are requesting an ombudsperson. We know that in some organizations, they have an ombudsperson because, there are issues of diversity or harassment. In some cases, financial malfeasance. In other situations is, money laundering, you name it. So you want to be relevant to the need of the organization. And I think I'm seeing, more people or more ombuds willing to work within the organization they're in. And at times they're able to move the whole organization to a true standards of practice organization. So I see, the profession continuing going forward, but there are a couple of areas that I sort of alluded to that I'm sort of concerned about. This issue of confidentiality. Okay. So where I am now, I am able to analyze data and to write reports because there's no fear of being subpoenaed, no fear that, some law firm or some judge is going to request my records to be shared. So I keep a lot more information that I can analyze. And with the advent of artificial intelligence, there are tools there that can help us identify patterns. Not only that, with the advent of social media and all of that, we need to reconsider how we define confidentiality. Is it okay to email an appointment, to text an appointment, and I'm sure there's still colleagues today that will not take an appointment by phone. How realistic, how productive is that? So, my expectation is going forward, in keeping with, the thinking about transparency, that people will feel comfortable scheduling. It is a right and not a privilege to meet with an ombudsperson, if we can look at it that way. So I see that space being shifted somewhat, especially with this remote work and all of that. We have proven that we can work remotely and still be productive. So we have to use technology and the tools. And also I mentioned AI. There may be an improvement in areas of case management so that you're able to track a case, track data, and then using AI to identify patterns, to identify areas that need to be improved. So actually, I see, a bright future for our profession, albeit modified depending on the culture and the needs of the organization, as long as the Ombuds is clear as to what they do, how they do their work, and how they interact with the visitors.
I want to do a follow-up question for that, since we have a few more minutes before we go into Q&A. Can you share your thoughts about having stated more about taking calls via Zoom or some virtual space versus in person?
Yes.
Because some people do want to meet in person, but some people find that they have more privacy to where they can go somewhere and have a discreet, confidential conversation with the ombuds via Zoom. Which one do you think is more relevant in these times?
So I'm going to say both. And I'm going to say both, and I'm going to, be transparent. When I was with Coca-Cola, 99% of the visitors were by phone, because it's all over the world. There's no way I could meet with them in person all the time. And when you bring Zoom, where you can actually see the image, it's actually an improvement over just hearing the voice. Okay. If I had a preference, it would be in person. But given the need, we have to open up as many channels as we can for people to work with us. And it's, we've been learning, just like we're doing this particular event, we've been learning to take advantage of the video conferences, whether it's body language or voice intonation and all of that. I still have people that, next week I'm meeting with 4 people in person. They can only meet with me in person. They don't want, Zoom or anything like that. So I'll do that. And yes, it's a different dynamic in person. It is a different dynamic, I agree with you. But we have to open as many channels as we can to be able to make our offices and our services accessible to a variety of people or diverse population.
Ryan, I have one last question. If I can just jump in there with this last question, is that okay?
By all means, please. Yeah.
You mentioned, Thomas, about the relevant to the need of the organization. The Ombuds is relevant to the need of the organization. You mentioned earlier. How can we, as ombuds as organizational ombuds in our profession, help more organizations to understand that we would be very much an important role for their organization? Because there are a lot of organizations that they don't know what an ombuds is. They don't understand what the office is set up to do and how it operates. They are really confident in the resources that they have and the structures that they have. Can you share what we can do to let more organizations know that there is a need to have an ombuds role or an office established within their organization?
We've been asking that question for a while. So to me, programs like we have now, because as we, interact now very few people in the general population can pronounce the word ombudsman. Okay, so I think we have to start with something that people can manage. Okay, and we've started, colleagues have started writing. I regret that I haven't written as much as I should have, and I do have materials that I should, that I can write about, so that in popular media, whether it's a radio drama or TV drama, we can have ombuds inserted in those day-to-day, things that people watch. They can feel comfortable with the term. They can feel comfortable with the role. They see it. Yeah, it may not be as accurate, but at least they get an idea of what it is. Because mediation is everywhere now. It's even written in a lot of policies, and judges, always have mediation on the side if needed. So I think doing something to, popularize, even though initially it's inaccurate, people need to be able to say the word ombudsman. And as we come up with something else, ombudsperson, something easier. And ombuds, I think it's the right direction we're going. It's easier to pronounce, easier to say. So that's my thinking, in addition to the campaigns. And I think the publishing that we are doing now is also helpful. We have a lot of PhD students who have done their dissertations on the role.
Thank you for that. This has been a wonderful conversation. What we're going to do now is kind of transition into the Q&A segment of our webinar. Just waiting to get the first question. But you can feel free to share more information while they're getting that together, and then I'll ask the question afterwards. Did you have anything else you wanted to share?
Oh,
you, Tom.
okay. No, yeah. So I know there are people who are not ombuds yet who are participating here. Let me just say to them that there have been many offices established by people within the organization who understand the role, and they pitch the role to their legal department, to their human resource department, and they succeed. And you don't have to do it alone. You can reach out to other ombuds, and they can help you put a presentation, a package together to present in your own organizations. Most organizations, the stimulus has been internal. There are few that the courts have sort of encouraged them to have an ombuds office. But most organizations, the stimulus has been internal. Someone who worked in an organization that had an ombuds program, they move to another organization, they bring it up. And so don't hesitate to reach out to some of us. We can work with you to help, encourage your organization to look into the role.
Thank you. Thank you for that advice. So we have a question here. Someone stated, I can imagine that anyone stepping into the role of an ombuds might be nervous, just like you were in your first role. Yes. What advice would you offer for someone that has that same concern?
Yeah. But this nervousness is pretty much with every job, in any job that you take. The only thing here is that sometimes the stakes are a little higher, someone's termination, things like that. My advice is, just know that you're human, you're dealing with another human being, and just be present for them. That's all. Just be present for them, and things unfold, and when they realize that you're there for them, you're listening, that's half the battle. Similarly, when people are meeting with executives, generally they're very nervous. And what I have learned over the years is that they are people too. I was just sharing with my team yesterday that, I met with my boss, and the first question I asked is, how are you doing? Okay, when I was young, I would be all prepared. And the minute I got in there, I was ready to do my speech, right? But now I just, how are you doing? How has it been? And they need someone to talk to as well. and they'll start sharing with you how their life is going, and you may end up learning a lot more from them that will help you in doing your work or in interacting with them in the future. So just be yourself, be human first. And going forward with AI, with automation, with change in human resources, we may be the only human in the system. So think about that.
Thank you for that. I think that we forget that, yeah. I mean, working with executives, working with visitors, we're all people, we're all colleagues, and forming those relationships is important. So I have another question here from the Q&A. It's kind of a three-parter, and so I'll ask all three of them, and then we can kind of take them one at a time if you want.
Okay.
So what do you see as the main impediments to wider recognition and use of ombuds? And then what can ombuds do to address those impediments?
Okay.
And then the third kind of part of this is what is one of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your role as an ombuds? And I'm happy to repeat those.
Okay. So these three questions, and Ryan, as you introduced the session, you mentioned the various types of ombudsmanry. I think the classicals, the executives, the push in human rights and all that is helping increase. So right now, pretty much every country has an ombudsperson. And if you go to Canada, every province has one. Okay, every municipality has one. And I see that going through. Because the rules there are clear, they enjoy the benefit of legislatures and all of that. It's the organizational ombuds model, and particularly in the US, that is struggling, because we are struggling with this issue of privilege, confidentiality privilege. And organizations are not quite clear when we talk about transparency, and then we bring confidentiality. There's incongruency there. So, I think if we were to push for shield law in these areas, now I know there's adequate case law now on a case-by-case basis, but you have to spend money to use case law to defend your particular situation in confidentiality. If we can, how can I put it? Yeah, basically make sure that we resolve this issue around confidentiality, the privilege, because it prevents us from fully doing our work. In terms of the data, we have to mask the data, we have to aggregate the data. So it's very difficult to use it to address issues. To me, that's one of the impediments, and you can address that by in the states, at least state by state, pushing for shield laws. Or just admit if we have adequate case, and actually there's enough case law to help us with the shield laws as well on that one. In terms of challenges, now, could you repeat the challenge question? Was it for the ombuds or for me? The challenge question, the third one.
Yeah, I think we could even separate it. I'm guessing from the first two. I don't know if they were meant to be necessarily three-part. Just so what is one of the biggest challenges that you have faced in your role as an ombuds?
Okay. So the biggest challenges I have faced in my role as an ombudsman, and I'm being very transparent here, is with this concept of neutrality. Okay, not structurally. Structurally, I've been able to overcome a lot of structural impediments. When you provide feedback year in, year out, 3 years ago, I had an intern to do a research in an organization to take a look at recommendations that the Ombuds Office and other offices had made to the organization and to see if they had been addressed. Only to find out that year in, year out, we're bringing the same recommendations. and asking, why is nothing being done? Okay. Now, when I was trained, we provided feedback. We didn't make recommendations per se. We didn't push our recommendations. So it was adequate for us to provide the feedback to the leadership. So the challenge for me is to stay neutral in such circumstances, because I have not. When recommendations are made, I work very hard to make sure that there's a response. You know, not that they do what I'm suggesting, but rather that they do something. Okay, so I have an advocacy component to feedback. And, you know, I'm saying it's a challenge because I'm sure at least 50% of our colleagues may look at that as not being impartial or not being neutral. So that has been a challenge for me. When change is not happening, provided information, provided materials, provided options for addressing it, you know, am I not being neutral if I find other ways of advocating to make sure that something is done? There's at least a response to those recommendations. Not that they do what I'm suggesting, but rather something is done. Because otherwise people see the role and say, you've been here for, 5 years and we haven't, we've been raising these issues, nothing has happened. So as a change agent, what tools do you have to make that happen?
That was a really great response. Because that question has come up in several different meetings. So thank you for sharing that. I have a couple of questions here that are related in the same sense. What is some advice that you would give a person who is transitioning from one role and looking forward or pursuing wanting to be an ombuds? What are some things that they can do to prepare for the ombuds role?
Yeah, so there are two parts to that. One is generic, job hunting approach. The other is, particular to our profession, because a lot of people have come to me with that question, and a good number of them end up finding jobs as ombuds people. Okay. First of all, you do your training. Whether you go to college or you take mediation, you take facilitation. And also identify people who are practicing in the field. Some offices may offer you a short internship, to get experience. And some mediation programs may offer you also, the chance to mediate cases in court systems. Because when you apply for a position, you have to show that you have been doing something in this field. And I've hired 2 people who were never ombuds before. The mediators, they had demonstrated that they could facilitate, they could do this, and so we could train them as ombuds. Okay, so and don't give up. I know people that I was working with for 3 years and finally got a job. So things have changed today. Organizations are hiring from the outside. It used to be they only hired from inside. But organizations are hiring from the outside. So, go to, conferences, IOA conferences or ombuds conferences, go to ACR conferences, connect and let people know you're looking, and have a plan, what kind of ombuds person you like, whether it's an organizational, whether it's a classical, whether it's long-term care. And in long-term care and childcare, there are a lot of volunteer and senior living communities, a lot of volunteer opportunities for you to be an ombuds person. And sometimes all you need is the name ombuds in front of, on your CV for people to even take a look at your CV. So that's my 2 cents worth, but continue networking.
Thank you. So I've got another 2-part question here.
Okay.
I'm going to read this. So during your many years of work in this field, have you seen a trajectory of how mental health issues play into organizational conflict? And then how does this shape the skills an ombuds should have for serving the organization? I think that's an important question.
Yeah, it's a very important question. It's, I made a note for myself to talk about that, but I didn't get a chance to talk about it. The answer is yes. Yes. The tricky part about this mental health issue is it's almost like it's how can I put it? It may be the work stress that causes mental health, or the mental health that may end up showing up as not performing and causing the conflict. And most of the time, it's very difficult to identify. Did we create this situation? And often, through the issues that I've seen a lot is that there's been conflict. There have been issues that have not been addressed, and over time, they lead to people being under a lot of stress and being impacted health-wise. And that showing also not performing. So during annual performance evaluations, they get poor evaluations. And when you meet with them, you realize that, there is a health component. And what I found also is that most managers cannot identify or cannot tell the difference whether the performance is caused because the individual is stressed out or other mental issues. So it behooves us actually to train. I mean, there's a national mental health first aid training that's available. You can get, through, at least in Washington, D.C., we can get it through the city, but I think through the federal government also, there's a mental health first aid that I think every Ombuds person should take. Because one of my first cases, and I thank Mayor Raw for this, it was a person that, they could not deal with in that department. It was in a legal department. And I was working with her. It was, I'd only been doing this work for 6 months. And I had never experienced anything like that. And I was having a difficult time as a chemist because I had a structure of listening, summarizing and all of that. And it didn't seem to get to the issue. And then when I contacted Mayor, she sent me a paper she wrote dealing with delusional or quasi-delusional visitors. Okay, now the person wasn't delusional, but it was a mental health component. But reading that article reminded me, and basically how Mayor outlines it is for individuals who are in those state of mind, you won't have a structured process for working with them. Our informality may not be the right one. So depending on the issue, you may want to develop options that involve formal processes or very structured processes that have an ending so that they get to the end. And if it's not resolved, they think of what other option to take. Because our processes as Ombuds are informal. We rarely turn people off. We continue working with them. It's not so clear, the only people I turn away from my office are those that are abusive. But other than that, I continue working with people, even that, I have people I work with, 2 years, I'm still working with them because I'm working with them because they have developed this trust, they're able to continue their work when they can come and, share, get some guidance when they come to meet with me. So in the organizations, American, correct me here, in the organizations that I've worked in, and I'm going to say this here, I guess I can be sued, MIT, World Bank, and IMF, A-type people, driven people, achievers, they were number one wherever they were. Now they come here, they're no longer number one. Stress, okay, and always under stress. So you really have to be on your game. You yourself has to be able to take care of yourself so that you're ready to deal with them. And so, taking mental health first aid, or if you have counselors in your organization and they're my friends, I meet with them. I meet with them for myself. I meet with them for my visitors. Okay. So yes, it happens a lot. I could say, maybe 20 to 30% of my visitors are under some kind of health issue, mental or otherwise, but it affects how they are looking at things. and how people look at them.
I really love and appreciate that question. That is so important, especially not just for the visitors, but for the ombuds,
Yes.
and even self-care for themselves. I have one last question before we close. And this one says, as an ombuds person, what barriers did you encounter from the organization to prevent you from effectively engaging with those filing complaints?
Okay. So this happened. I think I'll be able to answer this question partly because I've been in 2 organizations where the program was just being started. When the function is started, if there is not enough socialization in the organization, there are a couple of areas, if not 3 areas, where you meet with resistance. Human resources, because sometimes they think you're second guessing their decisions or their work, or you're looking over their shoulders. Okay, the legal department, because of your confidentiality, and I've had this, and I remember one legal department forcing me to provide, to be a witness. Okay, they are sometimes uncomfortable with the fact they cannot get information from you. And then sometimes managers, when they don't understand your role. All 3 are easily surmountable. The first 2 with initial socialization of the role before it's even introduced. And that's why when you're going to a new place, don't start taking visitors the first day, the second day. Spend the first 2-3 months socializing, talking to people, managers, HR, answering their questions. Because if you start taking cases right away, you have a difficult time moving those cases forward. And you will know that you have arrived when those HR managers are coming to you with their issues. When those legal practitioners, employee relations officers are coming to you with their own issues. When those managers are coming to you before they implement a change, you know that you have connected.
Well, thank you. That was a great answer, and a great last question. I wish we had more time to ask you more, and I know the audience has more, and I'm sorry that we're about out of time to get through all of them. So yeah, so I guess this kind of brings us to our closing today, and I really want to thank you for being with us today. And I want to give a really big thank you to Dr. Thomas Zgambo for sharing his wisdom with us. I know I'm coming away from this conversation with a lot to think about, and a lot to process, and really with excitement for the Ombuds field. So thank you, Dr. Zgambo. I also want to thank Dr. Mary Rowe for her fantastic introduction. I want to thank my co-facilitators, Hershenia, Sarah, as well as Jen Mickle for her support today. And I look forward to seeing how you're all celebrating Ombuds Day this year. So please take this opportunity to engage with your colleagues, with your communities, and to celebrate the Ombuds role. Thank you and happy Ombuds Day.